Everybody, if we could all find a seat now. If everybody out in the Welcome Center could work their way in here and find a seat, we're going to go ahead and do the interview time. This is where we're going to ask Woody some questions and answers and just find out a little bit more of the details and the personal story, and we're looking forward to that right now. And so let's go ahead and get started if we could. Brother Woody, I want to say again how much we appreciate you being here with us and sharing your story. In the early service, I learned something I hadn't heard before. That's pretty good. So I keep learning that, and that's thankful. I'd like to ask you to tell us a story about how you joined the Marine Corps and about your initial training that you went to, if you could. We've got a little bit here and there, but if you could share that with us.
All right. I was in the Civilian Conservation Corps. We called it the 3 C's during the Depression years. Roosevelt started to give the youth, some of the youth in our country, something to do. And there were about, I think, 650,000 youth served in the Civilian Conservation Corps. We did all kinds of work. We built parks and walkways and whatever. And I was in that CCC camp in Montana when Pearl Harbor was struck. So that was the end of the CCCs. You could go directly into the Army, and I didn't want to wear that ugly uniform. So I went home and joined the Marine Corps, or attempted to join the Marine Corps. I was 17 years old. My father was dead, and Mom wouldn't sign my paper, so I had to wait until I became a man at 18. Then I tried to join, and my first attempt was, we can't take you, you're too short. So, year or so later, they took the height requirement off, and they would take little runts like me. So I went back and joined, and at that point, we had to fill out an enlistment contract. We had to tell whoever was to get our $10,000 life insurance. That's what they paid if, in the event you gave your life in World War II, $10,000. But you got it at $52.20 a month for 20 years. Whew. But anyway, I filling out the form and had a block on there, religion. I didn't have any religion. I didn't know God, didn't know Christ, didn't know we had Episcopalians and Episcolopians and all those people. I didn't know any of that. So I didn't know what to put in there. And I'm standing by a little Italian guy, and I looked over to see what he had on his paper. But I figured he knew what he's doing. And he did. He had a letter C in there. Aha. I put a letter C in mine. I became a Catholic. Yeah, I didn't know it, but that's what I was. So then, normally we would go to Parris Island, South Carolina for boot camp. Of course, everybody on the East Coast was supposed to go there. But they couldn't handle all the people that were volunteering in the Marine Corps. They didn't have housing, didn't have drill instructors, so they began starting troop trains down in the South someplace, and they'd come up through every state, and they would pick up a few individuals that are going to be in the Marine Corps. And in West Virginia, they picked up 6 of us in our capital city and took us all the way to California. Took 5 days by train to get from West Virginia to San Diego. But that's where I took my boot training. And at that point in time, I learned, hey, we got a South Pacific. Wow, I didn't know that. And that we were going to someplace, islands, to fight an enemy I'd never heard tell of. So I was really ignorant about war and the residuals of it, and it was a hard lesson. But I wasn't the only one. There were thousands in the same boat that I was in. So that's how I became a Marine.
All right.
Well, speaking of you just learning about the South Pacific,
Yes.
So what did you know about Iwo Jima before you got there, and what did you learn about Iwo Jima after you got there?
Well, we took Guam back from the Japanese that had taken it from us in 1942. And then we settled, our unit, our division settled on Guam. We put up tents and chow halls and all that sort of thing. And then we continued to train on Guam for jungle warfare. And there's a lot of jungle on Guam. And we continued to train that way because as far as we knew, or as far as I guess maybe the Marine Corps knew at that time, that that was the only fighting we had done, because all of the islands had been jungle that we'd been on. And so whether they knew where we were going or not, I don't know. But finally, in February of 45, they told us that we were boarding ship. Didn't tell us where we were going. And all of our letters, before they could be mailed, had to be censored so that we couldn't give any secrets away. I didn't know any secrets to give away, but all the letters were censored, and then the guy would seal them and send them on. And so when we got aboard ship, at that point in time, they brought out a board that had an outline of what Iwo Jima looked like. And if you used a little imagination with Mount Suribachi on the end and it kind of curved up and around, it looked a little bit like a pork chop, so they called it a pork chop. But at that point in time, they told us where we were going to go, that we were going to Iwo Jima, but we would never get off ship because we were just a reserve unit in the event they should need more, and that the island was only 2.5 miles wide and 5 miles long. So nobody thought we would ever need the number of Marines that eventually ended up there. They had no intelligence about Iwo Jima at all, except aerial views, when planes would fly over and take aerial views, photos of it. But they had concealed their pillboxes to the point that once they built the pillbox, the only part of it that you could really see was the face of it. And then they would put sand on the top of it, so it just looked like the rest of the land. And according to a map that I have at home, they had 800 pillboxes on that little island of 2.5 by 5. And mucho caves, because they had dug out, depends on who's writing the story, you know, if somewhere between 16 and 19 miles of tunnel. You just can't imagine that, or at least we could never imagine that, of having that many miles in a volcano. But during all of 44, they brought in a lot of Korean labor, and they were the workers, along with the soldiers, of course. And they had to dig their tunnels by hand, by pick and shovel, because, you know, there was no electric and no automatic anything. But they would dig the tunnel or get the dirt loose, and then they would put it on the backs of people in a pack. They'd carry it outside and dump the pack and come back and get another load. And that's how they dug all of those tunnels. So all the bombing that we did, now here again depends on who's writing the story, but according to some parts of history, we bombed that thing for 130 days of some kind, you know, flying over, doing something to it. And then the last 3 days, it was 24-hour bombardment because I think it was Mad Dog, who? Yeah, yeah, right. Thank you. Had asked for more days. He wanted it bombed even more days than 3, and Nimitz said, no, you get 3. So they bombed it for 3 days around the clock. Well, they were all on the ground. Didn't do anything. So when we got there, most of them were still alive, of course, and they had about 22,000 soldiers on that island. So we didn't know any of that. And that's why we suffered such heavy casualties, because once they got us ashore, got the Marines ashore, then they came out of the tunnels and the caves and that sort of thing to take us. And the general, Kurobayashi, changed all of the method of defense on Iwo, different than what all the other islands had been. Previously, every island, and even Okinawa, the day I left Iwo Jima, Okinawa was struck by the 2nd Marine Division. And even there, they tried to get them before they could get ashore. If they couldn't get ashore, they couldn't do anything. And that had been true with all the islands except Iwo Jima. He said, let them come. Once they get here, where are they going to go? Boats were gone. So he had us.
I'd like you to talk just a little bit about your relationships that you built with your fellow Marines while you were in battle and combat, and also if you remember any of them that were Christians looking back now.
I'm going to answer the last part of your question first. I can remember some of the Catholic boys going to Mass early in the morning. And I thought, that's crazy. Why would they do that? You know, when I got to boot camp, having been a Catholic now for a week, because I put a C on my application form, then I had to go to Mass every Sunday morning. Everybody had to go to church service of some kind every Sunday morning. So, since my dog tag indicated I was a Catholic, I had to go to Mass with all the other Catholics. But when I went, they were talking in a language I'd never heard before. I didn't know what they were saying. Give me a thing. So I was usually the guy that stopped at the door and asked if I could pass out bulletins. At least I could do something. But I remember the Catholic boys on Sunday morning getting up and going to Mass. I still didn't know what it was. And as soon as I could get out of it, I quit. I didn't go anymore. I can't remember any in my particular group, close group, that professed to be or were a Christian. I don't remember any. I really don't.
And then can you tell us about the relationships you built with those guys?
I think this is common throughout, it's not unique to me. It's common throughout the Marine Corps, and I also think it is common in those units that gets involved in combat. My grandson Brent was a medic in First Desert Storm. His association with his individuals in his unit as a medic were just as close as we were in the Marine Corps. Because number one, you learn that your life depends on somebody else. You can't exist alone. They can't and you can't. So you build this bond between you and others, and there may only be 5 or 6 individuals where this bond is so close that you would not think a great deal about giving your life for that individual, because that's your train of thought. And that happened many, many times of Medal of Honor recipients. They received the Medal of Honor because they sacrificed their life trying to save somebody else. And corpsmen were notorious about that. You know, when you think of a medic, and here's a guy that's just been shot or been hit by a piece of artillery, and who runs to him for the very same place that guy got hit? It's the corpsman or the medic. That takes a tremendous amount of courage to do that. You know? And then you take the other guy that, for whatever reason, something happens that endangers the life of those individuals around you, and that individual throws his body on an explosive to save somebody else. one of the recipients that received the medal the same day I did. There were 13 of us awarded that day, 2 corpsmen and the rest of us were Marines. And one of those guys was Jack Lucas. Jack went into the Marine Corps when he was 14 years old. He fudged if there ever was a fudge. He wrote his own mother's letter and signed it, and forged his own birth certificate, and lied every way he possibly could. But he made it. But at 17 years of age, the president is awarding that 17-year-old youth the Medal of Honor, because Jack, being among other Marines that he was associated with, this bond again, a grenade came in that endangered not only him but them, so he grabbed it and stuck it in the sand as far as he could to keep from getting the other guys, and of course it got Jack. But he survived. And the other guys abandoned him at that point. And Jack found himself alone when he came to, and was trying to get his M1 rifle ready so he could continue fighting. And he's all blowed up, but he's not quitting. And a second grenade came in. And although he was alone, he grabbed the grenade, stuck it in the sand, and fortunately, it was a dud. If it hadn't been a dud, we probably would have never heard of Jack Lucas. But Jack, because of his action of saving his first group, primarily, received the Medal of Honor. And what a guy. Jack was my height. In fact, he was 1 inch shorter than me. He was 5'5", and I'm 5'6", and I always held that. I always reminded him, buddy, I got an inch on you. Don't fool with me. So.
I think it would be interesting maybe to do a study of Medal of Honor recipients and see how tall they were.
Yeah.
Tom, your next question.
Speaking of your Medal of Honor, what were your thoughts? When were you told you were going to receive the Medal of Honor, and what were your thoughts about that?
Well, I've used this example a number of times. 10 years ago, if you had said to me, Woody, tell me what cyberspace is, or gigabyte, I would have had no idea, because back that time it wasn't in my vocabulary. So the Medal of Honor itself was not in my vocabulary. I'd never heard of it. I'd never seen one. I had no idea how you could get one. So in early September, I'm perfectly happy in my tent with the other Marines, and the first sergeant calls me to his office, and he says, we had dungarees that were our work clothes, and then we had 2 sets of what we called khaki, and we had to keep our khaki for inspections on Saturday morning. So you always had to keep those clean and pressed. Well, you had to keep them in a sea bag because you didn't have any lockers, and of course they'd always get unpressed. So they were generous enough to give us one iron to a tent. So we could take the iron, and we had to, of course it was electric, so we'd heat it, iron all the wrinkles out of our khakis, and put a crease in them so we'd look sharp. And he told me, get your khaki on, you're going to the general's headquarters. That's why. He said, I don't know, just do what you're told, So I went back, got my khakis all lined up, ironed them, and now I'm ready to go. And a Jeep comes along, picks me up, little PFC driver, and he didn't know anything. I questioned him, why am I going up there? He don't know. So when I get there, here is a colonel standing out in front of the general's hut or tent. It was a tent, but he had sides on his. They didn't put any sides on ours, but he had sides on his and a door in the front. So the general or the colonel was standing there, and he said, here's what you do. You walk in. When you go through the door, walk up to his desk, stand at attention until he tells you what to do. Yes, sir. I am scared to death. I am a corporal. I have no idea why I'm there, what I've done that is going to get me in the general's tent. You don't go in the general's tent, not as a corporal. But I'm walk in and walk up to the desk and snap to attention. And he says, tells me something. I guess he said at ease. So I stood at ease, and then he began to tell me that I am being ordered back to the United States. And if he used the words Medal of Honor, it was the same as if you'd used the word cyberspace. I didn't know what it was. The only news I was happy to get is I'm going home. I don't care what they're going to do with me after that. I'm going home. You know, I'd been over there for months and months. So finally, he said whatever he was going to say, and I don't remember much of it. I really don't. And then he handed me this big envelope. It was about, I don't know, 8, 10 inches, brown, kind of a light brown, but that's tall. And he handed me this envelope, and he said, these are your orders. When you get to Hawaii, you turn them in. And I took the envelope and stuck it under my arm. I still had my cover, not hat, cover in my hand. So I walked outside and put my cover on, and the colonel was standing there. And I had that thing under that big envelope under my arm, and he said, that envelope is sealed. And I pulled it out then and looked at it. And it had a piece of wax down where the envelope comes to a point, about the size of a 50-cent piece. It was wax. And in the middle of the wax was the letter E, like a capital E. And he said, that is the general's seal. And do not break that seal. If you do, you'll be court-martialed. You turn it in when you get to Hawaii. So I still didn't know what I was doing or where I was going, except I'm going home. And when I turned him in at Hawaii, I turned him into the first sergeant of what was Marine Corps headquarters at that time. And they took those and wrote me a different set of orders so I can get another airplane out that I mentioned in my first talk here this morning. But still not knowing why I am going home. I'm just following orders. One of the unusual things happened. We flew all night to Frisco, or it seemed to me like all night. At least it was all dark all the time we were in the air. So when we landed at Frisco, I'm the only guy getting off. All of these other POWs that had just been released from the Japan prison camps were headed for, I learned later, Letterman General Hospital in Michigan, where they were bringing the POWs to restore their health and get over their malnutrition and that sort of thing. So that let me off just at daylight in San Francisco. I looked around and there was nobody around, and I'm out here in this great big blacktop air base, and I didn't have any idea where to go. But I looked across the field and there was a light. I thought, well, I'll go there. They can tell me something maybe. And I'm walking, now I'm still in my dungarees, I'm in my khaki. I'm in my khaki. And I'm walking across the field, and I get almost to that hut. By that time, the daylight is here, and they can see me coming. And 2 SP Shore Patrol, they were police officers, is what they were. They just had a good name like Shore Patrol, but they were military police. They saw me coming, and they came out and met me and said something to the effect, "Marine, where you going?" And I said, I'm supposed to go to the Marine Corps headquarters. And they said, well, "You're out of uniform." And they took hold of each arm and took me to the office. They arrested me. Because I'm out of uniform. I didn't have any other uniform. Well, fortunately, they called the Marine Corps headquarters, and they finally sent a Jeep over and picked me up. And before I got out of that, before that day was over, I was properly dressed.
All right. Can you tell us about your combat? We know what happened in those 4 hours that your citation tells us about. Can you tell us about the combat before and after the Medal of Honor action? And also, we know that your action that you did for the Medal of Honor was on the day that the flag was raised. And so can you tell us a little bit about what that was like? Was that before or after you took out the pillboxes, and what it was like seeing that flag raised?
Okay. Our unit, when we finally got ashore on the second day, we became what they called the spearhead. There were 2 Marine units, one on the right and one on the left, and we were supposed to be the spearhead to divide the forces, the Japanese forces, if we could, to push them, because they had more Marines there than we did, push them to the right and left out in front of these other units, so that they would get rid of them. And as a result of being a spearhead, we were the group that had to go across an airfield. They had one completed airfield, which they were flying their fighters off and shooting our B-29s down. And when we lost a B-29, we lost 11 highly skilled Americans, plus the plane, because we had no way in that part of the world to rescue them. So that was one of the reasons why Iwo Jima was so urgently needed, because of the distance. It was only 600 miles from Tokyo. So our job was to cross the airfield, and they had built these reinforced concrete pillboxes that we call bunkers today, but they were pillboxes in our day, to protect that airfield. And going across the airfield, of course, it's just open. There is no protection, nothing to get behind. There were shell craters in the airfield where they dropped bombs to blow, make the airfield not usable. And we could run from one hole to another, but we violated all of our rules, because we'd have 8 or 10 or 15 guys in one hole. And we were told, you don't do that. That's not what you do. You stay separated. So if a mortar comes in, it won't get everybody. It'll get as few as possible. So we lost a tremendous number of Marines just getting across the airfield. And then when we got across the airfield, we ran into these reinforced concrete pillboxes. And when I hit the beach, I had 6 Marines in my little spatial weapons unit that were flamethrower operators and demolition trained. So they could either use demolition or they could use the flamethrower. And they were assigned to our companies under our company commanders. We had A, B, and C companies, and 2 of those guys were each in those companies. So that if that platoon leader or that company commander needed a pillbox blowed up or burned out or a cave sealed, why, they would be there to do that. That was their job, in addition to being just a rifleman. Everybody's a rifleman, so they use the rifle until the other thing comes along. And I had lost all of those individuals by the 23rd. We hit on the 21st. By the 23rd of February, I didn't have anybody left. And I didn't know what happened to them. I didn't know whether they were dead or wounded or what. They just were gone. And it was so chaotic, no way of, at least I didn't know any way of finding out. So I was the only one left in my unit. And in a company, since we only had the 7 of us, and each company had their 7, I was the only one left in my company. And my company commander, who had lost all of his officers except 2, and we had Marines running platoons or anything, because it was, you just use whoever you could. And he asked me, he gathered a group of us together. In fact, I was a corporal, acting sergeant. You know, the Marine Corps used me for months and months as an acting sergeant and didn't pay me for it. I don't think that's fair. But I wasn't going to go as a corporal. I'm not an NCO. So my first sergeant said, "You go. He wants you there." So off I go. And we together in a huge shell crater. And we got down in that hole so that grazing fire couldn't hit us. And he was looking for ideas and whatever to break through these concrete pillboxes that had us absolutely stopped. We'd hit them a number of times and we'd lose Marines and back off. You know, I always like what Chesty Puller said. We never retreat. We just advance to the rear. That's what we did. You know, we couldn't go that way, so we're going to advance this way, you know. But we just couldn't penetrate them. And he asked me if I thought I could do something with a flamethrower. I'm the only guy left. So according to the guys in the hole, I don't have any idea how I responded to him, but they said, I said, "I'll try." And so he signed me 4 Marines who were to be my protectors. They were to support me as the flamethrower operator to shoot at whatever I'm trying to get to. And there were 2 automatic rifle people and 2 regular rifle Marines. And so when I would approach a pillbox, and you crawl with a 70-pound flamethrower on your back, you don't get up and walk, not in combat. You crawl, and because you make a good target with your body as well as these big tanks hanging on your back. And the Japanese had a tremendous fear, I'm told, of flame. So when a flamethrower made an appearance, then they concentrated on that person, because if they eliminate him, they eliminate the possibility of flame. So these guys were to protect me, and I took control of them. I'm the boss, so I put 2 on one side and 2 on the other side, and they were to do a crossfire. And I can very well remember my first attempt. We had a guy that had a position that we called a pole charge man. And we had built these things before we left Guadalcanal and brought them with us before we left Guam, and brought them with us to Iwo Jima. We did the same thing at Guam. But we used about an 8-foot piece of 2x2. And on the end of it, we nailed a piece of board about 12 inches in size, and then we would put TNT or composition C2 on that board and run a fuse back to where you're carrying the thing, and you pull a fuse and it will set off the explosive. And the pole charge guy, his responsibility was that once you found a cave that needed to be closed, or you burned out a pillbox, and now you need to make sure everybody in that pillbox is gone. His job was to run in and stick the pole charge in the hole, or through the aperture in the front of the pillbox, set it off so that make sure that there's nobody there that's going to come back and get you. And a guy by the name of Slager, a Marine by the name of Slager, was my pole charge man. So he's supposed to follow me with that pole charge. Wherever I go, he's supposed to be right behind me. And we got to the first shell crater looking for protection, and we got down in there and I'm to decide how we're going to do this. And I tell him which one I'm going to take out or try to take out. And I tell him that we're going to crawl out of here, crawl toward the pillbox. You follow me. And I get out, crawl up the bank, start crawling up the ditch. There was a ditch there that the Japanese had built. And I'm crawling up the ditch, and instead of him coming up out of the hole and crawling behind me, for whatever reason, he came out of the hole, but then raised up, not stood up fully, but raised up, and a bullet struck him right in the center of the helmet. And as it did, it penetrated the helmet. Then it hit the liner inside, which was fiberglass, and it didn't penetrate that, but it went around the side. And of course, the force of the bullet, as it went around this way, jerked him back in the hole. He just, went over backwards into the hole. And I thought I just thought he was dead. But I backed up and backed down in that hole, and he's still living. He's still breathing. His eyes are open. So, okay, stay there. He's done. So I never had a pole charge guy after that. So we just went on. But I can remember the first pillbox, and I can remember the second pillbox. But from there on, my mind is totally blank. I have no memory of how this thing progressed in that 4 hours. According to the witnesses that wrote up the history, the citation, they didn't come to me and say, what did you do that day? It was probably a good thing they didn't do that. I'd have told them a story they'd never believe. But they had 4 Marines and my company commander who all testified as to what took place that day. And it says that I used up 6 flamethrowers. A flamethrower would last, if you fired it just open and let it go, 72 seconds. We learned not to do that. We learned a better system than just fire it. But I still used up 6 flamethrowers in that 4-hour period on 7 pillboxes. And the thing that's bothered me all my life, and I've talked to psychologists, and they don't know the answer either, that I don't remember how I got the flamethrowers. How did they were back in headquarters, company headquarters. That's where we kept all the stuff stored so that we could protect it. I don't remember how, I can't remember how I went and got the flamethrower. I've kiddingly said, I'm reasonably certain that no Marine back there just jumped up and said, hey, wait out there, I'll bring you another one. I don't think that happened. So that has bothered me all my life. Why can't I remember that? And I don't know why I can't. But they are a horrible weapon. Now they say they're inhumane, but war is inhumane. Any kind of war is, what's the difference between a flamethrower and a bomb or a hand grenade? Or they're all inhumane. They were a very effective weapon for the type terrain that the Japanese had on Iwo Jima. Now there were places, Guam, all jungle. I never used a flamethrower all the time we were on Guam because I'd have set the jungle on fire. They didn't want the jungle burning, so we didn't use them. But Iwo, they were ideal weapon. And that's why we had the tanks there that had flamethrowers on tanks. And of course, they could fire 200 yards. Mine, if I can get 30, I'm lucky.
And what about the flag raising? Can you just briefly tell us about that?
I was, here again, we're trying to go across the airfield. And I don't know whether I had my head in the sand or what, but all of a sudden, the first realization I had of anything happening was Marines around me were jumping up and down, yelling something about a flag, and they were firing their weapons into the air. And so that's my memory of what was happening. And then I turned around, and this was the second flag. The first flag was only 3 by 5, and we were so far away at that point in time. 3 by 5 flag, we couldn't even. I never saw it. I don't know whether anybody else in our group did, but I hadn't. But then when I turned around after that firing, then we could see the 6 by 8 flag on Suribachi. So what did I do? Same thing those other Marines were doing. I started firing my weapon into the air. And it was a period of time. It's funny how these things happen, but I think it was a moment in time where we really needed that, because we had suffered so many casualties of wounded and dead, that gave us a spirit of some kind that made us realize, hey, we're making progress. We are winning. One of the visions that keeps haunting me is when we came ashore, got off the Higgins boat. We had a gunnery sergeant in charge of the Higgins boat, and of course, when you get off, you just don't walk off. You charge off. Charge as hard as you can charge to get to someplace to find some protection once you're off. And I remember charging by these stacks of bodies like cordwood stacked up on the beach, because we had no place, we couldn't take them from the island, and we didn't have any place to bury them at the time. So they'd roll them up in their ponchos. We didn't have body bags back then. Rolled them up in their ponchos and just stacked them up like cordwood. That's bothered me all my life. But eventually, each division, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, constructed their own beautiful cemetery. And all of those that had been killed from those individual outfits were all placed in their individual cemeteries. And when I left EWO on April 1st, they were complete. And of course, we were holding memorial services at the cemetery, or they were. I never participated. But eventually, when we started our repatriation of bringing back our dead from Europe and the Pacific, they offered the parents, the families of those individuals, the opportunity of bringing them home, or if they didn't elect to do that, they could be placed in the punch bowl. And actually, the majority of those 6,000 or 8,120 were placed in the punch bowl, so rather than bringing them back home.
I could go on like this for a couple more hours, couldn't you? Just fascinating to hear these stories, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do that for us. But unfortunately, our clock won't allow us to do that. And so we're going to be starting our second service in about 10 minutes from now. But I hope you'll take time just to thank him for sharing his story. I'm sure sometimes it's not easy to do that. But we're thankful that he's willing to help us to understand a little bit of our history and what's gone on before, and we appreciate what he's done and what those other Marines did there on the islands as well. One of the things that I've heard Woody say over and over again is he does not wear the Medal of Honor for himself. He wears the Medal of Honor for the Marines that did not come back, and especially for those 2 that died protecting his life when he attacked the pillboxes.
Absolutely.
And so I'd like us just at the time to express our appreciation. You stand together with me and just express that appreciation to Brother Woody.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I keep trying to say, anytime I receive an applause, it's not for me, it's for them. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Brother Clowen to come at this time. Go ahead and step down, Brother Woody. Okay. Brother Woody will be in the Welcome Center until the second service starts about 10 minutes from now. And when you hear, if you can be back in, we'd appreciate that. And fill in towards the front. We've got other folks that are coming. We'll appreciate that as well. And so,
Thank
Brother
you, sir.
Clowen, would you dismiss us for a word of prayer for this time?
My dear Lord, we do thank Thee this day for having Woody with us, Lord, and he's such an encouragement. And Lord, we just thank You for his heroism and for all those Marines that went on and gave their lives. Lord, we do thank You for the blessings of this day, and we just look forward to the word that we'll hear in the next service. Bless us, we pray, in Your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Before we dismiss Ms. Hour, can I ask you to be seated for just a minute? We do have a special treat for you, and I almost forgot this, and I apologize, but Nolani was here on Friday night, and she was an 8-year-old girl the day Pearl Harbor was attacked, and she watched the planes coming in over the islands here, and she is going to sing a song for us just real quickly here. Remember Pearl Harbor, one that Woody's referred to in a couple of his talks.
And watching the airplanes flying over, and I thought, paper boy came running up the street and saying Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and all the neighbors came out and bought a newspaper. Then we also had blackout, and every night we had an air warden, and he would go around the streets and checking, and all the homes had to have their lights out. We were lucky that we had shutters, so we could close the shutters and put our lights on. Then, we also, as a child, 8 years old, we had to carry gas masks, and they were kind of big, and we had to carry it to school every day and we carried it until the war ended, carrying these gas masks. So I have, stories about that. And I don't know how it came about, but 10 years ago, I sang Remember Pearl Harbor on the ship in Pearl Harbor. So I'd like to do the song for you now. Let's remember Pearl Harbor as we did the Alamo. Let's remember Pearl Harbor as we go to meet the foe. We will always remember how they died for liberty. Let's remember Pearl Harbor and go on to victory. History in every century records an act that lives forevermore. We'll recall as into line we fall the things that happened on Hawaii shore. Let's remember Pearl Harbor as we go to meet the foe. Let's remember Pearl Harbor as we did the Alamo. We will always remember how they died for liberty. Let's remember